everybody. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. I'm so excited to talk about this topic we're here talking about. We're here to talk about how to listen to understand. This is a topic on mental health and just how it impacts work. I think so often, maybe we don't actually consciously are aware of the things that are going on as it pertains to mental health issues, maybe because perhaps we haven't faced mental health issues ourselves, and so we maybe struggle to empathize or fully understand what other people are going through. But especially now more than ever, as coronavirus is hitting us, as we're spending more time alone and just being lonely and being at home, potentially working remotely, these are issues that are going to be coming up more and more frequently. We've got an incredible guest with us today. We got Johnny Crowder with us. Johnny Crowder is the founder and CEO of Cope Notes. He's a TEDx speaker and a mental health advocate. He invented a preventative interventional mental health solution that does not require internet or smartphone access. Johnny, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, my friends.
So, Johnny, how did you get here? How did you get involved in being a mental health advocate? I mean, I know obviously I've looked up your LinkedIn profile, I've done my background research on you, and it seems like you were pursuing one path perhaps in marketing or just content creation, and then it more or less switched for you. Or not actually switched, but you become more passionate about specifically mental health awareness and just mental health issues. How did you get into this? What's your story? I guess I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I grew up in an abusive household and was diagnosed with mental health conditions at a very young age. So I have not known a life without mental health conditions. I've never, I didn't have a traditional higher childhood or adolescence or young adulthood. I pretty much from the get-go was experiencing disordered eating and self-harm tendencies, suicidal ideation. And in high school, I actually received formal diagnoses. And I pretty much only went to college because I wanted to learn more about what was happening in my brain. So I was taking psychology courses in high school, eventually went to UCF for psychology. And I've always been passionate about mental health advocacy once I learned that it mattered. So before, when I was younger, I was a total brat. I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody about it. I don't want anybody to look at me weird. And then I realized everybody looks at everybody weird. So I started doing advocacy in 2011, but I was doing creative, like agency work, like creative direction, copy, art direction, design. And I loved doing that. But at a certain point, I started wishing that I could just do my volunteer stuff full time. And Cope Notes actually started getting momentum to the point where I had to pick and choose. So for some strange reason, my 25-year-old brain picked the thing that didn't pay me. So I quit my agency job and I've been full-time at Cope Notes for a few years now.
That's really cool. That's awesome. What was the inspiration? I mean, I know obviously you had mentioned that you had mental health issues throughout your childhood, but why did you start becoming a mental health advocate? What was that switch in your mind from saying, like, I don't want to talk about these things, to saying, you know what, this is a conversation that needs to be had and we need to have these conversations?
So in my TEDx talk, I mentioned that I don't really believe in like turning points and light bulb moments and stuff. Not that I shouldn't say I don't believe in them, but I should just say I've never really had moments like that. Everyone's like, what's that one moment where everything changed? And I never had a moment like that. It was just hard every day. So I do remember one thing though that impacted me. I don't know if it was the magical moment, the movie moment, but I used to teach and perform improv comedy in high school and college, and a fellow comedian in Orlando had died by suicide. So the comedy community threw the Orlando Indie Comedy Festival as this fundraiser, like a benefit, and then we gave the money that we raised to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I didn't know crap about them at the time. I didn't choose who we were giving the money to. I can't take credit for that. But on stage, this woman, the president of the Orlando chapter at the time, was being presented with this check. And she was talking about, here's what we do. And we do a lot of peer support and advocacy, and we go around raising awareness. And I was like, wait, people go and willingly tell people what they're diagnosed with and how difficult it is. And so I chased this woman down in the downtown streets of Orlando at like 3 a.m. And I'm like, hey, I want to volunteer. I want to be a part of it. Because I always thought that I had to be fully put together in order to help people. So I was like, I need to wait until I'm perfect so that I can serve. And she goes, no, like all of the advocates who work with us are living with a diagnosis right now. Many are still in treatment. I'm like, I'm still in treatment. So it was very freeing for me to realize that there was a way for me to help that didn't require me to be this like perfect version of myself that would never exist.
I think that can relate to a lot of people. I think that can relate to a lot of leaders. I think that whole feeling of I have to have all my ducks in a row to actually make an impact is something I think that holds true for so many people. I think, and I think this applies beyond work stuff. I'm thinking of me personally. One of my own insecurities is I have potentially delayed marriage and having children with my fiance because I felt like I needed to have all my ducks in a row. Everything needs to be perfect for me to start a family. I need to have all this financial perfect safety net of everything being there. And I was very apprehensive to even getting started on any of that process until I had that. And I haven't really shared that with many people, not especially not in a professional setting, but that's something that I know I've been insecure about. And I would imagine that a lot of people have something in their life that they aren't fully going forward with because they think they have to be all there. So I think that's a really relatable point that you bring up.
I think with creative stuff too, you can feel like, oh, that song wasn't ready to put out, or, oh, I shouldn't have posted that, or I shouldn't have shared that because I know I could have made it better. And what happened in me, because I used to do copy for a long time, and we're talking OCD, extreme, like debilitating OCD, and perfectionism to the point where I basically couldn't do like daily tasks. Like I couldn't make a sandwich perfectly. I couldn't turn a light switch on perfectly. I couldn't put my socks on perfectly. I mean, it was excruciating. And something that really helped me start to give myself a little grace and realize that not everything will be perfect, and often like 100% of things are not perfect, was when I used to only do copywriting for creative. And then I started getting into copy editing. And they're two very different skill sets. And I realized through learning to edit that you can write a book and finish. You can edit a book for the rest of your life. There are always ways to improve things and make stuff better and chop and move words around. And I think I just realized, like, I apply that to daily tasks. Like, am I going to edit this metaphorical book for so long that I never publish it? And the same is true for little stuff, like a LinkedIn post or an interview. I've been on the news and stuff, and I'll see something that I do that, I'll cross my legs weird, or my face will look weird in the lighting, or I'll say something wrong. And I'm just like, yeah, the alternative was to practice that for so many years that I never did the feature in the first place. And it's just, the alternative isn't worth it.
I think that's a really good point. You know, at Facebook, they have this notion, done is better than perfect. Like, just get it done. That's better than perfect. But I think within that whole realm, it would seem like that potentially is I don't want to say an insensitive remedy to somebody who has OCD, but it definitely seems like it's up that alley. I mean, when you say something like, and this is me wanting to be educated, when you say something like, I didn't turn on the light switch perfectly, or I didn't put on my socks perfectly, to me, I think in my mind, like, wait, you're telling me that my one sock being inside out is like, that's like that big of a deal? Like, to me, I don't even, like, there's so many things that just are like, just don't even cross my mental, like, hurdle, or just like my mental purview. I would imagine that some people are like that, just like me, where they don't understand. So I guess with that, I'd love to ask, what are common misconceptions about mental health issues?
I think one is this idea that, like, I've met a lot of people who will say something along the lines of, oh, that OCD stuff is really weird. I've never experienced any of that. And then I'll like watch the way they order something, or I'll watch the way they put their shoes on, and they're like, oh, well, I always tap my foot twice before I walk out of my front door. And I was like, why is that? And they're like, I don't know. I've just been doing it my whole life, and I never really noticed it until just now when I explained it to you. And so I think there are more and less extreme versions of that all over, where people will say, oh, I don't experience anxiety. And in the same breath, they'll tell me how scared they are for their job interview or how nervous they are for Christmas with their family. And I think one of my main goals in advocacy is to help people understand that if you have a brain, there is a 100% chance that you have experienced fear and doubt and guilt and all of the, anxiety, depression, stress, burnout, like all of these things that we think are just for our uncle, that crazy uncle, or we just think, oh, I know someone at my job who's just like that. No, you are the person who is just like that. Everyone just displays and copes with it to varying degrees. My mind is blown every time I hear someone say, oh, I've never been anxious, or I've never been afraid, or I've never been frustrated, or I've never been angry. It's like the truth, the real truth is I'm not going to tell someone how they feel. So this is kind of an overarching statement, but I would say that is more indicative of not really being accurate in your self-report, like not being 100% aware of the emotions that you are feeling. Because if you don't feel all of those emotions, and I'm not a clinician, so take this with a grain of salt, there may be a problem. If you don't feel, you find out that a loved one passed away and I don't feel sad. There may be an issue there. Like part of being a human is experiencing that range of emotion.
Man, that's a powerful, powerful message. I think it's very relevant to a lot of, and this is just my observation. I don't know if there's data to support this, but I think this is very relevant to a lot of men. I think a lot of men have been conditioned to stifle those feelings and push them down. I know I personally felt that. I know I don't know. I guess I have been more or less just kind of like, let's get through it, let's get over it, let's not necessarily acknowledge those feelings. But now as I work with more and more business leaders, executives, and professionals, it's funny what feelings are socially acceptable to say that they're feeling and which ones they haven't fully come to grips with yet. So for example, one thing that I've started to observe is that leaders are now starting to feel comfortable with saying the statement, it can be lonely at the top. That's something that has become more socially acceptable a lot more recently. Like if I say that to another leader, even if it's on a very first conversation, they've had enough time to look around and be like, yeah, you know what? Other leaders are saying that too. That's cool with me. That's an acceptable statement. But when it comes to a lot of other vulnerabilities or anxiety or other things, a lot of them are not as comfortable, at least opening up about that, at least on an initial conversation, or at least with a lot of people. What are your thoughts on that?
One of my biggest concerns with modern masculinity, particularly in leadership, is the idea that being a good leader means showing a stone face when adversity comes knocking. It's like I am more concerned with a leader who, finds out that, hey, the entire economy is collapsing, and the leader goes, we will persevere. I'm like, dude, this guy needs a freaking vacation. He is not processing this information. To me, that would make me nervous as an employee. And I think that leaders think I need to be this statue. And that's what people need. And it's people need to see that you are processing this information in real time, and that you are malleable and willing to pivot and make decisions and show humanity. Because I said it recently, and it still feels true now. Old leadership mentality was gotta be strong. And new leadership mentality, what is the new currency in modern leadership? It's vulnerability. It's honesty. If you, look at trends over the last 10, 20, 30 years, I guarantee you'll see mentions of strength and perseverance declining, and vulnerability and honesty and being open and transparent as a leader going way, way, way up. So I'm happy to see our definition of leadership changing, and I am hoping that some people listening to this will start allowing themselves to be a little human, because whether you realize it or not, there's a pretty good chance that your employees are waiting to see that from you.
So I was going to ask, my question is, what would be your suggestion for people that are at that holding on stage to becoming more vulnerable and having that experience? I mean, it's hard because you're patterned in your mind to be one way. So what would be the steps that you could suggest for someone to start transcending?
I think that, well, I'll say something that helped me. I know we're in shutdown right now. Doing improv comedy helped me a lot. But because you look like an idiot the whole time. You look like someone says like, let's get a couple suggestions from the audience, and someone's like, okay, he's a cow trying to get a driver's license, but he can't fit through the door because he has an inner tube around him. And I'm like, how am I supposed to be not a total buffoon for the next 3 minutes? And it slowly shows you over years of doing improv that you've been a, quote, a fool. You've had people looking at you and laughing at you for so long that you're not afraid to say, hey, I feel a certain way, or hey, I'm concerned about this. Because when a lot of times people will be like, how can you share about your life experiences the way that you do? And the answer is, I've shared way weirder stuff than what we're talking about today in front of my friends and family and strangers for years. So that's a roundabout way of saying it doesn't have to be improv, but I would definitely say practice feeling weird. Do something weird in front, or share something with your employees that maybe they don't know about you. You're like, you know what, guys? Let's go around just on our all hands meeting and everyone say something that they're really into that nobody knows. So I'm just this hypothetical boss. This is not true of me. But it could be, I guess. I really love show tunes. And that's something that I like as your boss. And now I want to hear what other people like, and just slowly doing these little exercises that allow people to be themselves. Because the real reason why you feel like you need to be a leader like that in front of your employees is because you feel that they wouldn't like you or trust you if they knew who you actually were. And the same is true in a family setting. If you're doing that to your wife or your kids, there's a part of you that thinks that if your wife and kids knew who you really were, they wouldn't like you as much. And the only way you can break down that wall is by being more of yourself and seeing that there's not a repercussion for it.
Do you think sometimes yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, Tori, if you don't mind, I'm jumping in. I think that was such a powerful message. I think if anybody's watching this right now, like rewind the last 45 seconds, replay what Johnny just said, because I think that is so powerful. I know I can personally relate to that. I know, and I've shared this story with, pretty much everybody, but when I was a drug dealer and I eventually got caught for being a drug dealer, I was a drug dealer not because I was addicted to drugs. I was a drug dealer because I loved the feeling of being needed. I liked the feeling of people inviting me to a party, or the feeling that other people would want to be around me, and I didn't feel like I could be accepted on my own personality alone. And that absolutely rang true for me. And I know for me, when I finally got comfortable with actually sharing why I was a drug dealer, and by the way, that feeling of wanting to be needed still holds true for me today. I just transitioned this through mentorship. I love facilitating connection between people. It makes me feel needed. It makes me feel like I'm doing something important, and that's cool. But being comfortable with actually saying that was so critical for me. And Johnny, I think you're spot on with that whole assessment. But I want to show a flip side perspective of this, because I think that there is value. I think there's this fine line between being vulnerable, but also being optimistic when it is the right time. I'm in the middle of reading Shoe Dog right now by Phil Knight, the guy that started Nike. And one of the things, the chapter I literally just finished reading this morning, was about the time that their supplier of shoes in Japan essentially said, we're going to stop our shipments. And he had just created, right before he got axed on that supplier shipment, he just started this new brand of company called Nike. Now, beforehand, they were Blue Ribbon. They were just called Blue Ribbon. They were selling Blue Ribbon shoes, which were imported shoes from Japan. They were called these Tigers. But instead, he was getting frustrated how they were treating him. They weren't shipping in their shipping on time. They were getting random shoe sizes. It wasn't working out. So he's like, okay, I'm going to try to produce my own shoes. And he called this new brand Nike. The Japanese supplier ended up catching wind of this. They ended their supplier contract. And so he's in this phase where his whole team is looking really glum, like, okay, well, we've lost our entire supply of shoes. Now we got this kind of unproven brand of shoe, Nike. We don't know if it's actually going to work. What do we do? Everyone's really feeling sullen, and he ends up saying, you know what? This could be a positive thing. Like, at the end of the day, they were shipping our orders in late. They didn't have the sizes right. We finally got rid of them. They were threatening to like do an aggressive takeover. Hostile takeover, and instead now we get to build our own brand. We get to invest in ourselves. When he wanted to feel a little bit depressed or like anxious about not really knowing what the next step would be, but that was such a uplifting moment for Nike and their whole company. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that fine balance between optimism and vulnerability?
I am a big fan of, this is something that I do. People might have their own version of it, but what I do is, if I receive disappointing news, like a supplier pulling out or something, I immediately run 2 scenarios in my head, because I already know the existing scenario is, oh crap, I was fully counting on this person to do their job. They didn't do their job. Now what? So I run 2 scenarios in my head. The first is, what could have gone wrong had they said yes? So I picture a negative outcome for the opposite of what happened. So let's say in a situation like that, the supplier says, okay, we'll keep working with you. And then we get so many customers that we can't keep up with demand. They keep sending all these bad shoes, but we had already signed a 5-year contract with them, so we can't get out of it. And then there's a legal battle, and I wind up getting sued or something like that. And I go to the moon with how bad that negative thing could have been. And then I look at the current situation, I think, whew, thank God that we were saved from that imaginary scenario that I just built in my head, because that would have been terrible. Now, what's the best case scenario of this? Who's my ideal supplier? This opens us up to making an upgrade. So I purposely picture worst case scenario of what I wanted, and then I picture best case scenario of what actually happened. I think together, I often, when I employ that, I feel like I dodged a bullet every time.
That's a cool way of looking at it. I think for a lot of leaders and just a lot of professionals, there's always another way to look at it, of a situation like, is this actually the worst case scenario for me? And we can build it up in our heads. I mean, more often than not, our own frustrations, our own anxiety, our own negativity about a circumstance is based on our own expectations of what we thought it would be going into it. Our deviation from our expectation is what makes us frustrated. Without having the barometer of what a baseline understanding of what this could cost us, physically, emotionally, mentally, makes it either much more palatable to handle or less palatable to handle. So I think you make a really good point there, Johnny.
It's definitely tough to adjust your expectations. I think any leader, to be a leader, you have to have totally unrealistic expectations all the time. It's like no one takes a leadership position without thinking that they can take over the whole world and invent the next greatest thing and I'm going to take this. This is going to be everyone who works here. It's going to be their favorite job they've ever had. We're going to grow as a family. I'm going to be all these people's godfather. Like, you have to kind of have some part of you that thinks that way to take a leadership position. And it's important to temper that with acceptance and understanding that you can make a huge fool of yourself by, in the Nike situation, you call up that supplier and you're like, I'm going to chew you out and I'll make sure that you never do business in America again or whatever. You have to balance your outlandish and unrealistic expectations, which helped get you here, with a humility that comes with accepting the fact that it didn't go the way you wanted. And then you turn to your team and you have to display that humility or else they won't employ it.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That's spot on, John. So what can we do as leaders, as professionals? What can we do to support our team that might be going through mental health issues? And what can we do to support ourselves to be more consciously aware that we might be facing mental health issues ourselves?
Yeah. So those are definitely 2 different questions. But I think the first thing that comes to mind is you have to have a system. Like, I've been learning a lot about personal finance lately, and pretty much every personal finance guru person will say you have to have it predetermined. You have to have a system set up. So this much goes to your mortgage, this much goes to insurance, and you have it set up so that when your paycheck comes in, all of the money is deployed where it's supposed to go. And I am very much a fan of that approach to health. I think you're not supposed to wait until an employee has a suicide scare, or until someone on your leadership staff blows up and takes 3 weeks off because they're so burnt out and stressed and no one did anything for months. Like, I am very much a fan of having a system in place. So have resources available in your workplace. Frame your culture around making conversations like this appropriate. You should be able to go into HR and say, hey, my daughter is 15 and she's pregnant. I'm trying to focus on work. I have a lot going on right now. I have to go to the doctor with her this afternoon. And just, you should feel like you're able to go into your employer and share that stuff. So I think part of it is having a system in place. Part of it is having a culture that makes it feel safe for employees to speak up about this, because it's way better for you to know now than in 6 weeks. And I think the third component is purposely trying to invite your team to be human and participating. So I don't mean, I see this a lot, unfortunately. Leaders will say, oh, on Friday we do like a happy hour. And then the leader is in their office. Or the leader thinks that just because they're sipping a beer near employees, that counts as them participating. It's not about beer. It has nothing to do with the theme of the happy hour. I think making sure that you are actively participating in the invitation of human traits. So anything as simple as, if you know that one of your employees has a side job or something, they like crochet or they do interior design or something, invite them to share that. Like, oh, have you done any cool design stuff lately? And she might be like, yeah, let me pull this up. And she shares it with you and some other employees, and little things like that. Like, for example, my CTO loves supercars. I love supercars. And I purposely asked him, even before I fell back into my love with supercars, every once in a while, in the middle of the day, we're not working on anything at that moment, I would Slack him and be like, did you see the new Maserati Grand Coupe? Like, what do you think of it? And he's like, the styling cues make no sense. I have no understanding why they would equip it with those rims. I mean, it is complete nonsense. And allowing that person, whoever that person is to you, to be human and share about something they care about for just a couple minutes, and participating, not being like, cool, but being like, no, show me the worst picture you saw of it. Like, let's really get into how bad this is. I think those invitations over time contribute to the culture, as do the systems and resources that you have in place.
That's awesome. And then for ourselves personally?
Yeah, people aren't going to like to hear this. Leaders are going to be pretty bummed and turned sideways around this suggestion. But the fact is, you have to talk to other people about what you're going through. There's a lot of leaders who feel like they can't share with their team, then share with your significant other or your family, share with your friends. Probably the biggest mistake I see is thinking, I do this a lot. When I'll talk to my sister, she's like, how's everything? And I only tell her about Cope Notes, because that's all that's really happening in my life. I feel such tremendous pressure around Cope Notes that she'll ask me, how do you feel, you, Johnny Crowder? And I'll say, there's no difference between me and Cope Notes. Yes, there is. So I think it's not feeling like you're a burden when you talk about work to people, because you have to put that somewhere. And B, purposely try to not just tie how you're feeling with how your business is doing, but sometimes what I'll do is I look in the mirror and I call myself Johnny Crowder. I have to do that, to look at myself and be like, dude, how are you feeling right now? I have to be so intentional about it. But one practice that I think can help on the personal level and on the team level is something that I've started doing lately, where if someone asks me how I'm doing, I purposely say some sort of true thing. Or if someone says, "What's up?" I don't say nothing. Or "How are you doing?" I don't say fine. I try to say, "I am confused because I can't keep my desktop background to keep switching from the image I send it to, or I set it to. Like the next day it switches back and I am perplexed. I've tried Googling it." And little things like that keep you from falling into that inaccurate self-report that we mentioned, where you just say fine, you say nothing. You have to be present and check in. How are you actually feeling? What's actually up? You got to be honest.
That's cool. No, I like that. I think that's a really, really good point. A question I had, but I think you kind of answered it, was like, how does that evolve over time? I know, or rather, can mental health issues evolve over time? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. I know for me, because of COVID, I never felt lonely before, but I felt lonely. Like I moved to a new city. I moved from Indiana to Austin, Texas, and didn't really have many friends. Can't really go out. You know, and by the way, I can totally relate to what you're saying about like your identity being part of your work. But I had a point like in June and July where I was like, I need to do some things for me, where I just am meeting other people, friends, whatever, like in a socially distanced manner, whatever, but to get me some social anything, because it has to happen, because I'm all work right now. And yeah, that really helped me kind of figure that out. But I never ever felt lonely before. And I thought it was weird. But to actually acknowledge that actually felt great. It was really relieving to kind of say like, hey, I feel lonely. And it's okay to, and then I realized it's cool. It's okay to feel lonely. It's like okay to have that feeling. And I didn't feel weird about it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
One thing that I've started employing over the last few years that's helped me a lot, I can't take credit for it. It started in therapy, but I will say how I feel in the most elementary terms possible. So I will literally, you can vouch, anyone who spends any time with me can vouch for me. I say things like, I am happy. I am sad. I feel frustrated. I literally boil it down to the most basic, I feel disappointed. I feel embarrassed. Just choosing to phrase those things that way gets you so accurate in your self-report. And beyond all of that, it goes back to the culture thing. You don't have to think critically when you're with a buddy and you guys are just talking about what's going on. You might be like, whoa, we actually just had a whole talk about mental health and how I've been depressed and how I've been eating and sleeping differently. And it didn't feel like anything. And the reason is because the culture of that friendship is such that you are allowed to share without repercussion. So I think as the workplace culture shifts and you start feeling more comfortable, you'll start having mental health and self-care conversations you'll realize it 3 weeks later that it was a self-care conversation. You don't realize it in the moment because the culture doesn't create enough friction to where you're conscious of it.
You know, I have to say one quick thing before we end this lunch and learn, because I think that's such a great point that you bring up about people not being consciously aware of it. But I also see this in our mentor relationships. I just did a group meeting, our group discussion with one of our corporate partners, where we just bring everybody that's in the mentor program together for a nice big group meeting where everyone can share and connect with each other and share about how their mentor relationship is going. And one of the fascinating things that we discussed was this notion that we don't necessarily know what is the most sticky part of our mentor relationship advice or stories. And I was chatting with one mentor pairing specifically. This guy named Alec was paired with this guy named Carlos. And Carlos was mentioning, he's like, when I show up at these mentor meetings, I just feel like we're kind of just like talking. We're just kind of talking. It's just kind of a casual conversation. And then I turned to Alec and I said, hey, Alec, so what were some of the things that were really impactful that Carlos said that you may realize that he may not, rather you realize that he may not realize was really powerful to you? And then he just shared multiple stories that Carlos had shared with him that had a big impact on his own personal life and professional life that he never actually admitted to Carlos before that. Carlos was like, whoa, I didn't realize how impactful that was. That's cool. Like, I realized this is more than just a conversation between two people. Like, I didn't realize how me casually sharing this thing about this thing that I did with my wife had an impact on your relationship with your spouse, and how that played a big role. I just thought it was casual conversation, and it creates a bigger impact on how it relates. So I think you're just spot on with that, with just recognizing maybe weeks later how a conversation impacts us, but also that we should acknowledge the other person that it did have that positive impact, because they may not necessarily realize that.
Heck yeah.
Well, cool, Johnny, this has been awesome. This has been such a good lunch and learn. I feel like I've learned a ton. I think that you've given a lot of great wisdom and insight to our audience. I guess my one final question is, how can our audience learn more about you? How can they connect with you? How can they dive deeper with you?
If you don't listen to anything else, just go to copenotes.com. It has most of the things you will need there. There's a contact form if you need to get in touch with me. I am on Facebook and LinkedIn as Johnny Crowder. I am on Instagram at Johnny Crowder Loves You. I don't believe in Twitter, so I don't have one. But Cope Notes has a Twitter if you need to tag us for whatever reason. And then I'm in a metal band called Prison. So if any of you guys love metal, we love playing Austin. We can't wait to come back. And honestly, if you need to get in touch with me, like if you have a specific question about Cope Notes or how it works or speaking stuff or anything that we talked about, the contact form on the website gets checked every day by me. So don't think that a DM somewhere will get to me faster. The contact form is definitely the best route.
Cool. Johnny, thanks for being here. Tori, thanks for being my co-host today. Everybody, thank you all for being here today. I look forward to seeing you at our next Lunch and Learn. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.